Now, on Monday, President Joe Biden announced that he plans to run again in 2024 as far as the US presidential race is concerned. But that he's not ready to make it official is also something that's caught the attention of everyone, not just in the United States, but even abroad. But questions, of course, continue to swirl about the timing of his re election campaign. Those closest to the president insist that his 2024 campaign launch is imminent, but the president himself does not appear to have made a final call. We'll debate on that, but before I do that, let me also introduce my guests today. I'm joined in by Corinne Clark, who's a Republican strategist, and Crystal Knight, who's a Democrat strategist. Many thanks to you, Crystal and Corinne, for joining in today. As I was just introducing the topic for today to our guests, Biden's announcement is still an informal one. If I could take that question from you, Crystal, first. He's also known for dragging his feet on this particular decision when it comes to, formally announcing his re-election campaign. What, in your opinion, explains this deal?
Well, I think, the president is likely going to run unopposed. There are some people who've already announced that they intend to seek the Democratic nomination, but they are not considered viable candidates. And so really it's at his disposal when he can, announce or when he should announce. And I'm sure the people who are in his most inner circle are making that determination, but there's really no rush because as soon as he actually announces that he's running for reelection, he has to hit the campaign trail. And if there are other legislative priorities that he wants to focus on right now through the summer, this is the time to do it so that you have something to campaign on once you begin traveling around the country.
All right, Corinne, it's also being talked about that Joe Biden has slipped past his previously outlined launch dates, which were, of course, outlined by his closest advisors. Do you think that this sort of dilly dally may just work against the Blue Party, not just President Biden's re election campaign?
Yeah, I think Crystal raises a good point. I think that Biden is hoping to have some legislative accomplishments before he hits the campaign trail. At this point, he has very low approval ratings and not a lot of legislative accomplishments. So I think they're hoping to postpone this as long as possible to get something that will rally a crowd on the campaign trail because right now they don't really have that. I think that is the issue for Democrats and for not just for Joe Biden, but for Democrats in general. And I do think that they are taking as much time as they can to string that along and really build up the resume before the launch.
All right. Um, Crystal, many believe that Donald Trump is also going to be, he is the front man when it comes to being the challenger from the GOP. Um, is Donald Trump right now milking the arraignment that has happened? And is this arraignment going to now place Joe Biden on the back foot? Because we all know that the fundraising that we've seen in the last few sort of weeks that has taken place post Donald Trump's arraignment has almost given him an advantage over Joe Biden. How do you think this arraignment is going to pan out, not just for the Grand Old Party, but also for the Democrats?
Well, I think right now it's too early to make the determination about how it plays in support of the Democratic agenda. I think as it relates to Donald Trump, right now it's just an arraignment. They're indictments, but he hasn't been officially charged yet, meaning the charges they're not sticking right now. This is just the process of going through the evidence and understanding exactly why the charges exist. I don't know, that Donald Trump is necessarily milking this. This cannot be a good thing for his reelection campaign, particularly with another pending case in Georgia where those charges,
What
like,
explains the fundraising campaigns? And he seemed to have there's been a sizable jump in his popularity as well as far as the polls are concerned.
right. Well, I mean, I think that's immediately after the news broke. But if we do a poll today, I don't think that those numbers would be the same. And so, anytime, what we know about Donald Trump already is that any news, good or bad, it does give him a boost in polls. But what we also know is that that boost does not last forever. That's because, you know, he's in the forefront of people's mind when he's in the
Right.
news. And then after the news settles, people kind of go back to wherever they were as relates to their favorability around him. So again, I think it's still a little early to make the determination. Is he fundraising? Absolutely. I think any person would off of that kind of news, if they're potentially thinking about running for reelection, which he's already stated that he is. But how it will play down the stretch, I think we have to give it a little bit more time.
All right, Corinne, if I could bring you in on this, let's talk about Joe Biden. Many believe in the US, especially the US voter, that Joe Biden is way past his prime. Do you think that age is becoming a concern for Joe Biden's re-election campaign or chances of his re-election?
More than age, more than anything, I think it's actually Joe Biden's, specifically his mental fitness. I think that that's a legitimate concern a lot of Americans have expressed on both sides of the aisle, actually. The only ones who seem to think that Joe Biden is not shouldn't be required to take a mental fitness test are Jill Biden and Joe Biden. I think there's a lot of pressure on him to prove that he is mentally fit to continue to serve in office, and that will get harder for him when he does hit the campaign trail and is making these personal connections with voters and making speeches, and we will see the long
Right.
line gaffes and everything again. And I think that's an uphill climb for him, that he is going to have to prove that he is well enough. And I think it has more to do with him personally and his mental capacity than it has to do with his age.
Mental capacity, that is one word I've heard Republicans use very often for Joe Biden. Crystal, how do you assess on those kind of allegations or rather accusations that come that Joe Biden is going to be mentally unfit for a re-election in 2024?
Well, I think if Joe Biden is still, is if he's actively serving, I don't foresee him not being able to serve moving forward. And I think, people love to talk about Joe Biden's age as if Donald Trump isn't near his age. And so if we're willing to suggest that Joe Biden needs a mental fitness test, I think we have to do the same for a president or potential candidate who
Right.
would be just as old.
But Crystal, there's a follow-up question to that. In February this year, the Associated Press conducted a survey which indicated that fewer Democrats want Biden to run again compared to the numbers last year. Is age also a concern for Democrats when it comes to Joe Biden?
I don't know that it's age. I think it's candidacy and electability. Unfortunately, I don't think the Democrats, we have a deep bench. And so you may see it probably is true that there are people in the party who do not want him to run, but we don't have another alternative right now. And when I say another alternative, of course, there are plenty of candidates across this country, but someone that could beat a candidate like Donald Trump or someone that could launch a formidable campaign. And what we also know is a sitting president rarely, in rare cases, gives up a second term, at least a second stab at running for a second term. And
All
so
right.
I think it's a non-starter, it's a non-conversation that there's another person beyond Joe Biden right now.
Is that a non-starter for the Republicans? Corinne, your thoughts? And there's a very valid observation being made by Crystal, and most of the Democrats also have voiced the same concerns that why should age be used as a parameter only for Joe Biden? Why shouldn't it be applied to a Donald Trump as well?
I think it should be applied, and that's why the stress should actually be on mental fitness and not age. Donald Trump has actually taken those mental exams, he's passed them. Joe Biden is not considering even taking them. I think that is concerning to the public, and that is something that will be very easy to compare on the campaign trail if Donald Trump is willing to have this transparency and these public records while Joe Biden refuses to take these exams. That's going to be a big campaign issue for Biden. But the bigger issue, I think Crystal pointed out, is that the Democrats don't really have a bench, and there's not a lot of enthusiasm behind Biden. I don't think it's a ringing endorsement to say,
Mhm.
we don't really have anyone else, so I guess he's our guy.
Is that the reason why we see a divided Congress now? Something that was also, I mean, that is what led to the debacle for the Democrats as far as the midterms were concerned. Crystal.
I don't think that that has anything to do with how the midterms shaked out. I think, Democrats just put up better campaigns and better candidates, and we did have something to run on, some wins. But I do think, if I'm being completely transparent about our bench and again, our candidate electability, of course, there are plenty of people out here, governors, senators, who would love to run for office, run for president. But I think the moment that we're in right now, if we are potentially facing another threat against
Hmm.
a Republican, governor, excuse me, a Republican candidate, in that being Donald Trump, I do think that Joe Biden is the best person to run against him.
But what happens to other potential candidates? Many have even considered Kamala Harris or a Gavin Newsom or even a Bernie Sanders. What happens to those potential candidates?
Well, for Kamala Harris, she will remain on the Biden Harris ticket. That's one. I think for Gavin Newsom, what many Democrats have already stated is if Joe Biden announces that he's running for reelection, they will stand down. I would expect that. I don't expect Bernie Sanders to run again. I think he's tried, and he's been unsuccessful. And it doesn't mean that he can't try again, but I don't see him taking an additional, stab at this type of seat.
Right, but I do believe personally that this kind of delay that we've seen as far as a formal official announcement from Joe Biden is concerned, that may just not work well for the Blue Party. Having said that, let me now talk about the leading issues impacting the United States. Corinne, we've seen how the issue of abortion impacted the midterms. Earlier, it was about abortion rights. Now it seems like the battle will also include the abortion pills. Is this going the entire issue going to work? How do you see it working for the Republicans? I'm going to take that question from Crystal also, but before I do that, I'll like your opinion on that, Corey.
There's definitely potential for that to be a big issue in the 2024 election. I think that the midterms, we saw more passion surrounding that than we will see in 2024 after 4 years of Biden, after 4 years of economic turmoil. People end up usually voting with their wallets, and I expect that we will see that in 2024 as well. I think that the impact of the abortion issue was exaggerated as a negative for conservatives. I do think it was a huge victory to see Roe v. Wade overturned, and I think that's something that Donald Trump will actually celebrate on the campaign trail, because that would never have happened without his Supreme Court appointees. It's one of his greatest historical accomplishments, and that will turn out a very key demographic for Republicans, which is that evangelical vote that usually turns the tide for a presidential race, and I think that that will actually work to the favor of Republicans in 2024 if it does become a big issue.
Crystal, how do you see? Do you not think that the issue of abortion will not be necessarily on top of mind of the US voters? It did seem like a prominent issue during the US midterms, where people didn't want to say vote for someone like a Blake Masters because of his official position on the issue. How do you see this now panning out during the 2024 election?
Well, I think, what the president will do is, he will reference states like Kansas and states like Michigan, where voters overwhelmingly said, we want the law of the land to stay, which is that women have the choice what to do with their bodies. I also think, yesterday we saw that the Department of Justice really overturned what the Texas judge has ruled about mifepristone, that it's not, FDA regulated or approved after it's already been approved for the last 23 years in this country. So again, what I see happening, I do think that abortion will be an issue, maybe not the top issue like it was in 2022, but I think that the president will be able to run off of the wins around the abortion issue. Roe versus Wade fell, but there are states and there are still voters in over half of this country who still believes that women deserve choice in the matters of their body. The right also tried to do away with mifepristone, which has also been FDA approved for 23 years, and it's been blocked. So those are wins for the Democratic Party, despite Roe versus Wade falling,
Right.
because voters are overwhelmingly going to the polls and saying, we get to choose and not the federal government.
It's interesting you talk about those wins for the Democrats. And when we talk about that, something we even heard Joe Biden, sort of echo during his State of the Union address some days ago. He spoke about the legislative victories that his term, or rather his tenure, has managed. Corinne, if I could bring you in, even the issue of gun control, that seems to have been dominating the headlines, especially in terms of what's happening in Tennessee in the last few days. Uh, is that going to impact the Republican performance?
I think if it does impact the Republican performance, it will be as a positive for Republicans. The gun control issue is increasingly unpopular. Gun ownership in America is actually at its highest level ever, the most guns that we've ever had. And I think that's because individuals are seeking that personal right to own a weapon and to practice their Second Amendment rights. These gun control policies are incredibly unpopular. That's actually why the Democrats have not successfully passed gun control in a number of years. And I think if that becomes an issue, it is a negative for Democrats. I will say back on the abortion issue, I don't think it's going to be easy for Joe Biden to claim victory on things like DOJ overreach to overturn a court's opinion. That's actually not the role of the DOJ. It's another example of executive overreach. That's going to be a major problem, especially if the nominee for the Republican side, which it looks like it will be, is Donald Trump, because that is one of his biggest issues, is this federal overreach of a corrupt Justice Department. You can't overturn court opinions like that. So I think that will become a different issue than the abortion one if Joe Biden claims that as a victory.
Crystal, I would like your thoughts on this. How do you weigh in on what Corinne just said?
Well, I think it's interesting that she said the DOJ has overreach, and really the conservatives shopped around judges to find in Texas that could bring this case. And they're trying to overturn something that has been the law for 23 years, basically saying that the way that the FDA approved the abortion pill was wrong. And so when we think about, this particular case and the larger case just around women's rights, what Republicans have continued to do is to judge shop. They have continued to find courts that will be friendly to their cause, because this is really a challenging case that it's going to be an uphill battle for them to win, because they're not only fighting public opinion, but they're fighting many doctors who've already said that this is safe, that this is viable, that this is appropriate. But they're also fighting, again, public opinion. Why go to this step if you've already gotten Roe versus Wade? It's back at the state level now, but they're just trying to grab and reach more things to restrict women to have access to their bodies.
All right, Corinne, it's time for me to wrap up. But before I do that, I'm going to take one question from both of you. Corinne, what are the potential challenges that you see ahead for Joe Biden? I know the economy has not really helped him earn too many brownie points with the US public, but how do you see this going forward in terms of the potential challenges for his re-election campaign if one were to be officially announcing it?
I think his biggest challenge will be momentum, and we don't see him building a lot of momentum right now because he does not have a lot of legislative accomplishments. There's not a lot of enthusiasm behind his candidacy. And we see the opposite on the Republican side because Donald Trump happens to be one of the most popular candidates. He's filling stadiums every weekend full of people. He's raising money like crazy. And I think that will be the biggest challenge to overcome. But as far as policy issues, I think the economy will be number one. Immigration will be a huge issue, and corruption. And this idea that there is an elitist deep state against the average American citizen will become a huge issue in the 2024 elections, especially when Donald Trump becomes the Republican nominee.
All right. Crystal, I'd like to have your thoughts as far as we just discussed how it'll pan out for Joe Biden, but what about Donald Trump? I know that after the arraignment, everybody's been talking about um, how this is just the beginning of his legal woes.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that Corinne mentioned corruption, because I actually think that will be the number one issue for Donald Trump, is just his distrust among voters. People don't feel like they can trust a candidate who has already stated that they can walk out on Fifth Avenue in New York, shoot someone, and nothing will happen to them. People don't think that they can trust a candidate who lies on their FEC reports about money that they spent on their campaign, saying that it was paid for campaign use when really it was for hush money. People don't have trust in a candidate who tried to overturn the election results, the will of the voters in the state of Georgia, asking the former Secretary of State to find additional votes. And so when we think about corruption, when we think about trust, that is at the core of Americans when they vote. We think about how we feel about a candidate, how we connect with a candidate, and can we trust a candidate. And so while Donald Trump may absolutely be popular, I will not doubt that at all. What will be really challenging for him is messaging and trust and belief in him as the future of this country. I don't think that the cases, the legal cases surrounding him, clouding him, will be helpful. There's also the FBI, raided his home in Mar-a-Lago for, classified documents. All of those things get to the core of trust and corruption. And I think those are going to be the biggest challenges that Donald Trump will have to overcome if he is the actual nominee.
Right. That I think has been a very insightful discussion. Many thanks to you, Crystal and Corinne, for joining in and sharing your thoughts and giving us your precious time. And with that, it's a quick wrap from my end. Thank you so much for watching CNN News 18.
Thank you.
Thank you.